Okay. Okay, so are you ready? Good. So we've seen what was last time, what was a neural network. Now we know how to train it. So now it's time to play. So let's go there. Okay, it doesn't work. Yeah, it works here, actually. Let me put that here. Okay. So this is done by Google, some team in Google, and it's just a nice visualization of different types of neural networks. Okay. So here you have different type of problems. You have a classification problem or regression problem. The visualization here. So the visualization for the classification problem are nicer. So we will do the classification problem now, but you can also try it by yourself with the regression. So basically, this is to just use the term we have used already in the previous course. This is a binary classification problem. So we have two classes to classify. Basically the orange one and the blue one. So I've told you last time that when you have two classes, one is 0, 0 is 0, 0 is 1. Here they have done something which is perfectly equivalent. They've done -1 and 1. Okay? So you have the point that belongs to the class -1, so the first class, and the point in blue that belongs to the second class. Okay? So what you want to do is to have a neural net. So, and you have two data in input, x1, x2. Okay? And you have several samples, so each dot is a sample. So you have two features data. Each dot is one feature. So for example, this dot has a value for x1 of -1 and a value of x2 of 3. Okay? So there is just something a bit confusing with this representation. So it's very beautiful, but it's a bit confusing. You have the feeling that the output of the neural net is an image and the input of the neural net is an image. It's not the case. It's just how they do that. It's just they take a lot of points for each different values for x1 and each different value of x2, and they do the forward of the neural net for each of this combination of points. Okay? So for example, when you see x1, you have this -1 to 1 colors. It just means that you have a lot of points that are from -1 to 1, and you see what are the output for all the possible combinations, which is possible to do when you have two features, which is of course impossible for when you have image in input, because you have millions or thousands at least of features, so you cannot represent all the possible combinations. But here we have two features, so it's easy to represent to represent all the combinations. Okay, so all the possibilities for the input data. But you just have to remember that each point here corresponds to one value, one forward, and one output for the neural net. Is it clear? So. Okay. Okay. You can. So you have several options in that. You can do a test training set ratio to test data. So for example, if you put 80%, it means that you have 80% of data that are in the training and 20% in the test or validation set. Okay. Okay. So and you can. Okay, I won't talk at all about that, but you can specify how many. So here you can specify how many layers you have and how many neurons you have by layer. So let's do something simple. Only one layer. Okay. And two neurons. So if you do that, this is exactly the architecture I have shown you just before. Two hidden layers, two inputs, and one output. Okay. So you can play a bit with the data. You can add some noise, you see, to the data. We won't put noise to begin with. And here you see you have the batch size. So now you know what is the batch size. The batch size is the size of the mini batch you specify during the training, okay? And you see epoch here, you will see we count the number of epoch. So epoch is when all the data has been seen by the neural net. Okay, let's start maybe with this. Okay, no. So you can specify, of course, the learning rate. I told you it was very important. You can specify the activation function. So let's start with linear. So it's not a real neural net. Everything is linear here. You can specify a regularization. So this is something we've also seen last week, right? Did we? Yes. Last Tuesday, we see that you can regularize your weights to avoid overfitting. We won't do that now. This is the alpha coefficient in what I've presented last time. So the strength of the regularization. And okay, classification program give you different types of data. Okay, and so we have initialized the weights of a neural net. And first of all, this is what gives the output of my neural net. So basically, my neural net do a linear separation, and the points that are on the upper right are classified as -1, and the points that are in the lower left will be classified as 1. And I can try to iterate over those. So I do one epoch. So I don't know exactly how many data you have, but should be written somewhere. Maybe I don't know. But okay, is it written? No, I don't know.
No, but if you add just batch size, so the sum will just be epoch size. Batch size.
No. The batch size times the number of
epochs.
No. The batch size times the number of iterations that you don't know give you 1 epoch, but it's.
No, but we assume that the batch size is the same as the number of total size. So we just.
Oh no, it's not the total size. If we can do that. You're right. You can do the batch size to be the total size. So you can do batch. I don't know if it's okay. I don't know. No, because 30 is the maximum, but it's not the total size. Okay, so let's do batch size of 16. We don't care. Okay, so let's do 1 epoch, right? So here you see the loss function. So you see the decreasing of the loss function with respect to the training set and with respect with the validation set. Okay. Okay, and you see that you have converged, and then you can continue as long as you wish. It doesn't decrease. And the classification here is not very good because you are very wrong a bit everywhere. And this is normal because you have only linear activation, and linear we cannot separate non-linear data. This is the separation between data is non-linear. So you cannot achieve that with a linear model. So that's normal. You cannot do that. And so this is what we have here. We have overfitting, we have underfitting, or we have a good fit.
Conversion, but it isn't actually conversion. It's like presumably you want the values of this part to be blue and the other part to be.
Yeah, because you're right. So this is the value R as a target. Okay, and the background color is the output of the neural net. So of course you want the output of the neural net to be equal to the target. So you want to have orange background with the orange dot and blue background in the blue dot. And the intensity of color also is an indication of the probability. So if you want to be sure, you have to have a dark blue here, dark orange here, and maybe lower value in between.
Not actually S squared include function. It's independent of it's sort of only dependent on radius, of course.
Yes, of course, yes, that would be good, but we don't have that. So yeah, no, here it's underfitting, overfitting, or good fit. It's underfitting. You don't fit your data enough. Okay. So let's try to add a bit of non-linearity. Let's try ReLU, for example. So you see, if you add ReLU, all your neurons have only positive value or 0, because this is the ReLU function. But at the end, whatever you take here, at the end you still have like what's it called? The softmax function I've told you about that will have some result between 0 and 1, but here you multiply by 2, so between -1 and 1. Okay, let's start again with this. Okay, slightly better. Okay, slightly better, but still you're not able to reproduce the full classification. So you just focus. Obviously you can do something like that. So you do it where there is less point to reduce the error. Okay. But what does it mean? It means that your model is not, so it's an underfitting, it's also underfitting here. Your model is not complex enough. So if you want to have a more complex model, we can add layers and we can add neurons in the layers, okay? And if you do that, we have a more complex model. And you see that after a while, you're almost able to converge. So you have a very good, on the training set, this is perfect. And on the test data, this is good too. So you're good here. Let's add some noise. You see, it works still well.
Noise actually improved.
Sometimes a bit of noise can improve the result. It's true. If you make too much noise, maybe not so much. Yeah. It's not truly overfitting here, because if you still have the blue part here and the orange part here. Let's try to do overfitting, but to do overfitting, we need to have very complex models. So let's do something very complex with a lot of neurons. So of course it's much too complicated for what we want to achieve, but maybe we can have overfitting if we do that. Not so much. Let's wait a bit. It seems that we start to overfit. You see, the validation loss start to increase, and the training loss continue to decrease. Yeah, you start to have overfitting here. Of course, as it is quite a simple problem, and I need to put a lot of noise, few data to have this, but let's continue a bit. I think it will continue to overfit. But maybe we'll stop eventually, but yeah, clearly we overfitting, but we're also very unstable. And the instability is due to the batch training, because as each time you optimize differently depending on which batch you are considering, you turn around. Sometimes you.
Okay, so the batch size in relation to the total data set. Oh wait, so just testing all the data over again? So just
no, the epoch is related to the old data set. But in one epoch, all the data set has been seen.
But is it adding new data sets?
No, it's not a new data set. It's always the same that is optimized several times. Okay, we clearly see overfitting around here. So this is how overfitting looks. Of course, if you add a bit of regularization, you will see that you won't overfit as much. Hope my regularization is enough. But with regularization, you should not overfit so much. You still overfit a bit, of course, here because it's very, very noisy.
Also, the values of the loss function, we see now that it starts flickering. Also, previously we saw the flickering changing drastically. Is this also some kind of measure for overfitting?
Oh, that's a good question.
Depending on the epochs.
I've never seen that as a measure of overfitting, but it could be. No, the true measure of overfitting is when your validation is increasing. You can oscillate even if you don't overfit. If you have a lot of noise, that could happen. I will put a bit stronger regularization rate here. Because with here I have just increased the regularization to show you that with some regularization you avoid overfitting, as we have seen last week. And actually this is what you observe here. And why is that? Is because you see that some of the neurons are very, so the weights are the intensity of the color of the connections, and the value of the output for each layer is what you see here. For all the combination of parameters again, and so you see that some intermediate features are discarded. And you see also, quite interestingly, so it works well here. You see, even with strong noise here, you work quite well actually. And this is because you have had a regularization, even with a much too complex model. But you see that it's quite interesting what he does here. You see, the first neuron he split the domain into very simple linear domain, and then you will combine everything here to have more complex. Here you have what we have seen, this parabolic shape of division. So you have a combination of parabolics that give you then the good final shape. You see, you don't overfit here. It's because of regularization, and so yeah, because some weights are very, very small. But we can do the same with L1 regularization. Just have a look. And it's a bit strong here, but the advantage with, yes, so L1 regularization, the difference with L1 and L2 is that you have actual zeros. So here you have only these weights that I use. So you see, actually, so it means that you have only a 2 layers neural network, because those ones are only a combination of the same thing all over again. So this is and so you see the efficiency of L1 regularization to select. This is why it's called sparse regulation or sparse classification, because it selects only the features that are needed. So at the end, you have a very simple neural net. So with L1 regularization, you can specify a quite complex model, and then it will just automatically cut into what is not used.
Yeah, but is there any sort of algorithm that basically removes the neurons?
This algorithm removes the neuron.
Yeah, but it's still zero, so it still has a compute through it, doesn't it?
Yeah, but then you look at the weights.
Yeah. Okay, so
and it's zero.
Algorithm that
It's not an algorithm. You don't need an algorithm. It's only a coding problem. Algorithm is when you do to make some processing. Here there is no processing. You have actual zero, so there's no need of algorithm. You just say, okay, zero is zero.
Yeah, but you're still sort of multiplying something by
zero. No. If it's zero, you don't do it. It depends on how it's coded. It's a technical problem. It's not an algorithm. It's not an algorithm. Okay, we have converged, obviously. So very efficient. Regularization is a very efficient thing to do. We can try also doing a very low learning rate to show you what it. Oh, it's stopped. Not okay. If you do a very low learning rate, you see it takes a lot of time to train. You see the loss function does not evolve very, very quickly. But see, probably it will work eventually, but you see it takes a lot of time. That's why learning rate, too small learning rates are not always a good choice. Even if you don't take the risk to diverge. So, and what if I take a very strong learning rate now? Yeah, if you stick the very strong learning rate, you see that you're diverging. Yeah, you diverge. It's a strong learning rate. It's too strong. And then once everything is blocked, you cannot recover. Everything is zero here, so there is no more gradient. So everything is lost. Oh, sometimes there's something happening. Okay, so this is to show you also the effect of the learning rate. So of course, the more difficult things to do is to train this one. Don't know if it will work like that. Not sure. No, okay, of course not. Not sure you can do it. Maybe the regularization is too strong here. And also I have a lot of noise. Let's a bit reduce the noise. So this is very complex because this is very highly nonlinear. As soon as you have a decreasing here, it means that you're on a good. It means that you can continue. If you start to increase, it means that you will start to overfit. But here, it's very difficult because it doesn't seem that we overfit here. So it's a very special case where you go to the wrong direction. So you both overfit and underfit. You have a very bad model, but which is improving only on the noise and not improving on the. Let's put a smaller regularization. Okay,
we can need another activation function.
I don't believe that will help.
That's the one with 0 in the negative. And
yeah, that's this one that everybody used, and I think it will work eventually. That's why you should be careful, because at the beginning, if your model is very bad, you can have this increasing of the test, but it doesn't mean that it's overfitting. You should continue a bit to see if it starts continue to increase. And here you see you decrease now. You start decreasing, but it's very, very slow. Maybe the learning rate is a bit too slow. Let's boost a bit our training. Yes, you see, it's minimizing a bit quicker. So learning rate is quite important. Sometimes you have the feeling that your neural net. Okay, this is from experience. If you train a neural net, when you will do that, sometimes it won't train. You will have a very you will have a curve like that, with the feeling that you have converged, but it doesn't work, okay? So the first thing to look at in that situation is to see if your dataset is good. Because most of the time, if your neural net is not able to learn, it's because you have some problem in your dataset. But I mean very concrete problem. Maybe you have data that are a lot of data that are equal to 0, or because in the loading, when you load the data, you made some mistakes. So this is the first thing to look at. And the second thing to look at is the learning rate. So sometimes you can diverge or not converge because you have not a good learning rate. So this is the second thing to look at in general. You see it start to work. So this is the two things. Actually, you should always be, this is an advice which is very often given in neural net guidelines. When you start trying to learn neural net on new data, generally a good advice is to start to try overfit the data, because you should always be able to make overfitting if you have a complex enough model. And this is a test to see, okay, do I do something do I have something to be seen in my data? If you're not able to overfit, it can be because you have some problems in your net. For example, you have coded something bad and you have only 0, and it's a bug. Of course, it's a technical bug. It's not a conceptual problem, but this is the first thing to try to see if all your system is okay. It will also detect bug. Okay, it works now. It's a bit look like, I don't know if you know this movie, Nightmare Before Christmas. You don't know? It's an old movie for kids, and you have this shape in the Halloween world. You don't know this movie. Okay, it's a very nice movie. Okay, okay. So now we have converged. Good. Okay, let's stop with it. But I would advise to go on this website. You can play with the parameters. Maybe it will help you to understand better. You have also some regression problem. So regression problem is to reproduce not only the classes but the intensity of the color. So this is a quantitative problem. So here you have this is something that can be done with a linear model, and here something that is much more difficult to achieve. You have only 2 examples actually with mods like that. Okay. So let's go back to the lecture, but this is okay. This is the link is on the slides, and I would, if you have some time to spend on that, it helps a bit to understand what role plays the different parameters. It's a very nice tool, I would say. So okay, here I don't know why, but I copy paste the same thing. Okay, maybe I won't go through that now. It's a bit difficult aspect, and I would like to spend some time on that. So, what is the main problem when you train a neural network that you want to avoid? What is the main problem you want to avoid when you train a neural network? This is a question. Do you have an idea? Overfitting. The main problem is underfitting is not so much a problem, because underfitting you adjust the model and you see that it's a bad model, but you know it. Overfitting sometimes this is, and you will try to improve it. And to improve the model, you add complexity. So you add neurons, you add layers. That's okay. But overfitting that could be problematic, because then you don't know how to you still want to have a complex model, but you don't want, of course, this model to overfit. You want your model to be able to generalize to new data. And we've seen already how to fight against overfitting. So one way is to select the model that does not overfit. This is the first way. This is a bit difficult because sometimes, as I said, you want to have a complex model. So if this model overfits, what can you do? We've seen another way to fight overfitting, which is regularization. And we've seen on the example of Google that it was very effective. L1, L2 regularization, also called Ridge for L2 and Lasso for L1 regularization. But actually, and this is a bit my personal feeling about that, why deep learning is working so well is because there is a lot of mechanism to avoid overfitting. Generally, you don't just use one way to fight overfitting. You combine a lot of different small tricks or small mechanisms to avoid overfitting. And all those mechanisms are called regularization. So regularization techniques, it's referred to all the set of techniques that give constraints to the optimization, and generally it's used to avoid overfitting. But you can also use regularization to inject some knowledge in your data. For example, if you know that some parameters should be between 0 and 1, this also will be considered as a regularization technique. But here I will focus more on the problem of overfitting and how you can use regularization. So L1, L2 regularization is a type of regularization only. This is not the only type, but this is the one we have seen. There are other types of regularization. And actually, we've seen a second regularization technique, which is stochastic gradient. Stochastic gradient is a regularization technique. Why? Because you don't, as I showed you with stochastic gradient or minimax gradient, you don't converge until the true minimum of the function, because each time you take the gradient of only a subset of the data, so you're not exactly in the right direction. So it's a way, if you can see it a completely different way. We've seen that as an efficiency, optimizing the computation cost, but you can see that as a way to add a bit of noise in the direction of the gradient. Here you see on my red curve, actually I do the gradient descent technique with a bit of noise. And adding a bit of noise in the direction, it's a way to avoid overfitting, because you won't converge until exactly the minimum of the data. You will be a bit around, and that's a way to mimic the fact that you will have new data when you will generalize your data set. So actually, stochastic minimatch is a very, very efficient way of regularization. And this is why sometimes, in the example on the TensorFlow playground, even if we don't have regularization, you remember at one point we didn't have any regularization. We have some noise, but we didn't overfit. And this is I think because we had this gradient, this stochastic gradient. Because each time you don't go exactly until the minimum, so you stay around the minimum and you don't overfit until the minimum. But this is also this stochastic. This is also what explains the oscillation of the minimization sometimes. Okay, there is another very, very used and at least always used regularization technique, which is called early stopping. So you see that the typical tuning curve, and I hope you remember what we have seen in the previous example with Google Playground, that sometimes you have the training that decreasing, but at one point you have the validation error that start to increase again. Do you remember that? Okay, so the idea of early stopping, so you keep in memory a bit the previous version of your model, so previous weights, and if you see that your validation start to increase, you say, okay, I stop, and I keep the version I had here when the validation error was the minimum. Of course, there is a bit of risk to do that, because maybe here it's increasing, but then it will decrease again later on, and maybe you missed this decreasing if you do that. And also another problem is that here you have very smooth curve, but as you've seen, and especially with stochastic gradients, so everything is connected, of course, you can have some oscillation, so it's sometimes not as easy to know if the validation loss is increasing. But so generally in the current neural network libraries, machine learning libraries, what you do is you have a patience parameter. So you say, okay, I'll wait like 30 epochs, 50 epochs, and if in 50 epochs my validation set has not improved, I stop here. And I stop and I recover the state of my model where the validation set was the minimum. This is early stopping. This is always used. Of course, I exaggerate a bit. It's not always. It's very, very often used. 99% of the case. So stochastic gradient is always used. Early stopping is almost always used. L1 and L2 are not always used, but could be used as regularization parameters. Okay, another very popular. It was very popular last year or 2 years ago. I don't know if it's still the case. But I think it's the case. A way of regularizing your training is dropout. So what the concept of dropout is, during your training, you randomly remove some neurons on a layer. So you don't train for each epoch. You have a slightly different neural net. So if this is your total neural network, for one epoch, you will remove, for example, those two neurons in red. So you cut the weights here, so you keep in memory the weights, but you just don't use the weight. It's like putting 0 here, you put 0, 0, and you do your training on those ones. Okay, so it means that you train with some of the neurons that are missing in the model, right? But then in the next epoch you will, so this is here, you cut this one, and this is your model. But at the next epoch you will cut those one different, and you will train with this neural net. Okay, and each time it's changed. So it's determined at the layer level, so you can have dropout for this layer, for example, and not on this layer. That's up to you, you choose. When you define, and this is what we'll see next Tuesday, when you define your neural network, you can put some dropout on that, okay? And so if you overfit, if your neural net was about to overfit, it will prevent the overfitting, because it will use, overfitting will use all the neurons to go exactly to the minimum. If you remove those neurons, you will be a bit away, so it will modify a bit the trajectory of convergence, and it will go on another direction and avoid overfitting. Unfortunately, a dropout is not available on the TensorFlow playground, but it's very, very useful. Just quick remark, generally we try to avoid dropout on convolutive layers, because the convolution is, so this is what we have seen last Tuesday. Convolution is a kernel that apply everywhere. If you remove some, for example, the center pixel of the convolution, that could not work as well, because it can bias the result. And also we don't put dropout on the last layer, because of course you need to have the last layer correspond exactly to the number of dimension you have in your target, so you cannot play with it. Another very, very popular way to avoid overfitting and to also accelerate the convergence is batch normalization. It has been developed in 2015, so 6 years ago, and it's a type of layer, a new type of layer. So it's a layer you put in your net as dense layer, as convolutional layers. It can be used only with mini batch training, because we use actually the batch size in batch normalization. So if you use batch normalization, one problem with batch normalization is that then your training will be very sensitive more sensitive to the size of the mini batch you're specifying. But so if you use a batch normalization, so you will do M forward. You remember that you do M times for the M samples, and you will use actually the batch itself, the mini batch itself, to compute some value. So the output of this layer, so you will compute the mean of your batch. So if your batch is time 30, for example, you will have the mean of the 30 samples, the standard deviation, and you will scale the output using this mean and standard deviation. So there is the computed mean and the computed standard deviation, which are used to scale your layer. And you have additional parameters that also are scaling parameters, gamma and beta in that case, that here are optimized during the training. And this is a way to, for example, if an output of a layer will give you very, very strong values, it might, more specifically, if an output of a Google layer will give very strong values or very low values. For example, if you have very, very low values as an output of the layer, if you put that, for example, as an input of a ReLU, you will have 0 all the time. So it won't work that well. So sometimes you can diverge and you can have very strong value, either negative or positive, and it will be a problem for the training. This is only a way to renormalize the value between two layers. So you have two traditional layers, you add one batch normalization layer, and it will renormalize your value between -1 and 1. So this is good. And why it's a way to regularize the training is because this mean and standard deviation will depend on the batch. So there will be a bit depends on which batch you are considering, and on which batch you are optimizing at the moment. So it will add a bit of noise in the process. So this is very efficient. So yeah, it's a bit more complex, but it's very efficient. So it's only to rescale between each layer. You rescale the values because sometimes it can go like crazy. And actually, this is a bit the same idea with L1 and L2 regularization. But here you scale the output of the layers, and with L1 and L2 you scale a bit the parameters and the weights. But the idea is the same. It's to avoid value go too far. Okay. Question on this regularization part. So, which is nice is all those things I've said: early stopping, dropout, batch normalization. It's one line of code to put that in your network. We will see that next Tuesday. So it's very easy. Okay, so you have talked a lot about data assimilation, I guess, in this course, right? And actually, there are some connections between data assimilation and machine learning. So here I want to just make the point of the connection that something are equivalent in data assimilation and machine learning. So I will stick to the linear case here. So we'll compare the linear data assimilation, which is the best linear MBS estimator. You see that, the blue? You remember that? And I will compare that with the linear regression and ridge regression, so which is a machine learning techniques, and show you this is exactly the same. So this is the equation for the blue best linear MBS estimator. So you have some state vector x, okay, that you know imperfectly because it's the truth plus some noise, p, okay. You have some observation, d, which has a link to the truth, but also that have some noise, so there are also some uncertainty. So you have two knowledge of the same thing. One is an imperfect which is called actually prior, but an imperfect knowledge of your field. So if you're in geoscience, for example, that can be the wind. So you know a bit the wind, but with some noise, and you have some observation of the wind. And you want to combine those two sources of information to have the best estimation possible. Okay. So if everything is linear, like this is here, you have the best linear unit, and you're estimating the truth by minimizing the estimation, and it leads to minimizing the following function. So you minimize the, so you try to find the x that will both minimize the error with respect with the observation, and the error with respect with your first guess. Okay. And this is data assimilation. We correct the forecast f given some observational data d. Okay. So have you seen that? Okay. And next slide, I want to show you that it's exactly the same thing as ridge regression. So we've seen ridge regression last Tuesday, and I show you that it is exactly the same, because in ridge regression, what you try is to minimize, to find the linear model that will h that depends on parameter theta, and that will minimize the difference between h theta of x and y plus a quadratic regularization term. Okay. So theta transpose theta is the sum of the square. And if you compare those two formula, you just realize that they are a bit the same. So what is d in the blue? So what are the observation in the best linear estimator is what in the ridge regression what we call target. The observation space, so the observation operator is the features x in the ridge regression. The state, so you want to estimate the state in the case of data assimilation. What you want to estimate in the case of machine learning is the parameters. Okay, so this is two different things, and the link between c epsilon and cx. So the relative importance of the error of the observation and the error of the forecast. Okay, this is what's called in ridge regression alpha, which gives you the relative importance of the regularization term. So basically, the regularization term in machine learning corresponds to the prior in data assimilation, and the misfit to the observation is corresponding to the misfit with the target in the last machine learning. So this is equivalent. And you can do that also with neural networks. So you can find a lot of equivalence in neural networks. Have you seen ensemble Kamel filter? Have you seen also Fordyvar, variational data assimilation? No? Okay, but there are equivalents also between variational data assimilation and regression in machine learning. There are also some other, because when you do ensemble Kamel filter, you integrate a model over time, a numerical model. So you can see this model as a similar to a neural network on several layers. There are a lot of paper who make that point. Okay. Question about that? So basically, we could say that data assimilation is like one type of machine learning, because you have data and you learn something from the data. Okay. So now maybe you've heard this. I don't know. Did you? It's always say that machine learning or neural networks in particular are black box. Have you heard that? Yeah. What it means basically black box, it means that if you have a machine learning, neural network, which is a machine learning model, this is a black box because what it gives, you give some input, it will give you some output, and actually you have some function inside which make no sense, like ReLU or hyperbolic tangent. Why? We don't know, and we don't care actually, because we have output from our input and we're happy with that. But we don't understand the neural network, really. We don't understand why it gives this result, why it works. Of course, it's not completely true, because when you have seen the example of TensorFlow, we have tried to understand a bit what was doing the machine learning model. You see that the first layer was dividing your space into linear division, and then you have this shape, and then you combine the shape to have the circle. So you understand a bit what the role of each layer. So it's not completely a black box, because you can identify what the role of each layer is. But this is feasible because we had a very simple case with two-dimensional data. So if you have multiple dimensional data, it's much more important. But the first question we can ask is, do we need to understand? Do we need to understand what our machine learning and what our neural network does? And this is actually a very famous phrase, which is quite old already, from a scientist called Fred Jelinek. He said, so he was working on speech recognition. So speech recognition is you record, and actually it's doing that now in Teams. You record the voice saying phrases, words, speaking, and you try to write what it says. Okay, it's quite a complex problem because there are some things that are not very well determined only from the language. There are some how do you say when you're not sure when one thing can have two meanings. So there are some ambiguities. Yeah, there are some ambiguities. So it's quite a difficult problem. So in the 80s, the traditional way to address this problem was to try to understand what are the basic mechanisms of the language. So if you try to understand English, you try to understand what are the basic mechanisms of English, and what are the people who do that? They are the linguists. The linguists try to understand how the language works. What are the meaning of the language? And he said that every time I fire a linguist, the performance of our speech recognition system goes up. So it's like a joke. It means that you don't need to understand what it does. You just need to make it work. And this is in some way what some people can say about machine learning. You don't need to understand what it does. The only thing you need to know if it works. But of course, I don't fully agree with this. And there are some reasons to understand what machine learning does. And the first reason is to is that you need that machine learning is give you some result that can be trusted. You need to trust what it gives, because you make some training, you train on some data set, but then you need to trust your machine learning to do things. And it can be very important, actually. If you use machine learning to make some auto brake, for example, for the cars, from the car, if you need to use machine learning to make the system brakes automatically when someone is crossing above your car, or to avoid to sleep when it's too wet or something like that, you need to be quite confident that the machine learning has worked and you are not doing overfitting. Because otherwise, if you're doing overfitting, it means that you can have some case where instead of braking, the system is accelerating when somebody is crossing the street. And of course, it will be very, very, I'm sure you're convinced that it will be a big problem. So understanding how it works is a way to trust what you do. If you want to trust your braking system, it's good to understand that it always will brake if someone is crossing the street. So this is one first reason to understand. One other reason to try to understand what's going on in the machine learning is maybe you know something about the system, and it is the case for physical models, for example, or physical when you want to represent physical system, you know things about the system. And one thing you know, for example, is you know that systems are energetically balanced. So you cannot create energy from nothing. So there is if you balance all the source of force and energy, the total should be zero. So this is something you know. You know that the sum of energy in the system is zero. This is called the conservation of energy. Okay? You cannot create energy from nothing, and you cannot lose energy from nothing. Okay? And of course, you want to train a model, a neural network to represent energy. Maybe this is something you want to add in your neural network. So you need to understand how it works in your network to know at which part of the neural network you should enforce some constraint like that, because you have some knowledge. So there is two directions about this beyond the black box. So try to open the black box and to know what is it the neural network does. You have one direction is to add some constraints to the machine learning. I say physical constraint, but it's constraint from expertise or knowledge prior knowledge you have. So this is the first direction. And the second direction is the opposite direction. You have a machine learning and you try to understand what it does. So first you want to make it works as you want. And the second is try to understand how it works. So these are two examples, so I won't give too much details, but a very simple example of adding constraint is, for example, if your neural network is supposed to give you the concentration of a chemical product, you will enforce, of course, you will enforce that this concentration is positive. So you will make sure that your neural network does not give negative concentration, which has no sense. I don't know if you're familiar with the notion of concentration, you cannot have negative concentration. You can have also some, as I mentioned, conservation law. So this is an example of a very nice paper, but it's of course a scientific paper. If you like to read scientific paper, you can read this one. It's very nice. So you have a neural network that gives you some output, and you add to the output one processing layer that will enforce some conservative. So you add one red box, which is something that you know, and one blue box, this is something that you learn. And in a way that you're sure that the output will correspond to what you know, but I've still learned what you don't know. And this is another example of, so this is the other part, how to explain now what is the machine learning does. And a very simple way to explain is to try to identify, for example, what are the input features that are important to predict what you are predicting. So for example, in random forest, it's very easy to do. This is called importance. It gives you what are the input features that are relevant for your prediction. But there is a lot of ways to do that. There is a very nice paper from Mike Govern et al. Who shows that, for example, he tried the tornado predictions using a convolutional neural networks, and he showed, and she showed that if, for example, you remove the wind as your input features, your prediction is decreasing. So you have a curve that say, okay, the wind is the more important parameter, and the relative humidity is the more important parameter. But some other parameters are not so important to make a prediction. So for example, reflectivity, not so important. So this is also a way to understand how it works. Okay, so I think I'm almost done here. Yeah.
This thinking that machine learning model that it is a black box. I don't understand why people think that. For example, if we take the playground now.
Yeah.
There are people who, for example, design the first layer. Okay, we now split it in some kind of lines. And then the second layer was split it in quadrants.
Yeah.
The third layer was split it in circles.
Yeah.
This is not a black box. You know how it's categorized.
Yeah, because you see it. But this is a playground. So this is a toy case. When you can represent, in most of the case, you cannot, because here you represent the output. You have a way to see the output for each layer of each neuron of your neural net for each combination of input features. This is something you cannot achieve in general. So yes, for a very simple case, you can have a look.
Okay, maybe that's because I missed last lecture, but does it mean that these layers and these neurons, are they generated procedurally somehow, or is it not that the person is designing a layer?
No, nobody designed the layer. It's training. So the neural net figure out by itself how to do that. The splitting that you have done. So first linear line, then quadrants, and then circles. This has been automatically done. It's not something that we have. It's not something that we have specified to the model.
Exactly what features it captures, but you hope it captures some features as it together.
How is okay? Then what exactly designed the splitting?
Nobody. It's a minimization procedure that came out with that. When you minimize the loss function, you have that automatically. That's the beauty of neural net. The beauty of the neural net is that you don't need to specify what are the processing. You just specify what you want to achieve, and it will do the processing that you need to do.
They give it such an initial state. That was what we saw then with the lines.
And yeah, and this is a posteriori explanation. These kind of things. But this is, yeah, you can do that, but for a very simple case. When we have 2 dimension, 1 dimension, you can do that. But if for multiple dimension neural net, you cannot do that. So that's why you need some more complex tools like the one that are described in the 2 papers here to do it.
Assume all physical constraints are either implemented at the beginning or at the end. So it wouldn't be sort of hard to know exactly if, okay, so in between the 4th and the 5th layer.
No, yeah. No, I understand, but not exactly. There is an example, for example, there was a work done that does compose these neural networks like that. You have some input. So I can show you because this is not exactly, but close to the example we will do next Tuesday. So you have an input. This is the value of a quantity at a time t. Okay. So this is the input. So this is a multidimensional input, of course. And at the output, you want to simulate the quantity at time t+1. So it's a forecast problem or prediction problem. So there is a way to do it, is to put a neural net, a big neural network that does that. And this is what we will do next Tuesday. But there is another way to do it, is to say, okay, I have already a physical model that give you a part of xt, but not too good. So I will add to this physical model, I will add a neural network model only to represent the part that is not known by the physical model. So you see that's not just adding constraint at the end or the beginning. It's like parallel computation. And there are even some more. You can do something more complex. You know that there is a physical model that gives you some very relevant quantity zt. And this quantity can be used, but it's not enough. So you need a neural network to complete this zt, and then you need another neural network to match zt to xt+1. And this is a bit complex, as complex as you want. So you know there are some. Yeah, you can mix a combination of neural networks and physical model in much complex way than only adding at the last layer. But a physical model is a constraint, is a type of constraint. So yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of things you can think of. That's really that can go very far. Yeah.
So the actual black box is how the choice of the activation function leads to the result. That is the actual.
Okay, no, the choice of the activation function is minor. I've never seen the choice of the activation function have any impact on the result. So it's more the size of the neural net or the which features you put in as an input, which loss function you're optimizing, what shards, and where do you put regularization, L2, L1 regularization. This is much more important than the activation function. Activation function most of the time has no physical meaning.
So that's actually always used.
No, except for the last neuron, that there you can use linear or for regression and softmax for. You can put when I do neural network, what I do is I just put I make a choice of several activation function, hyperbolic tangent, ReLU, or the type of activation function, and I do a grid search or frontal search, and I do a lot of training to see what is the best. And you will be able to do that next Tuesday. We will try to several activation function and see if there are some difference. My guess is there is no much difference between two different activation functions, but sometimes can. No, but they're all simple. But yes, I guess. I guess you can, yeah. You can try several things. For example, for one case I had in my work, it comes out that the hyperbolic tangents were actually better.
Question about terms of the probably black box, but usually our neural network capturing the same features every time you run it, if you run it from different angles.
What can you repeat?
No, as we saw in the Google example, we had different features like splitting it in this figure and whatnot. Are you usually getting the same results for different neurons? If you, let's say, for example, chose a different setup for the data? Or...
Oh no, there are a lot of randomness in the process. So it's not mandatory that the first neuron will give you this split and the second neuron will give you that split. And it can be very different. We can try. You can try actually on the background, but for two training will be very different. At least there is so many parameters to optimize that there is a lot of neural networks that are very different, but that will give you the same outcome, the same performance. Because you can put one process on one neuron on the other neuron. You can mix the neuron that won't change anything. So there is a lot of equivalent models. Okay. Other questions? Okay, great. So next week we'll do we will do one work on practical examples. And yeah. Thanks for coming.